Sublevel 4 just logged an entry.
That's impossible. Nobody's touched that door in 11 years.
Someone just did, and he brought a thermos.
The work order said clogged vent, sublevel 4, which is Velmiri corporate speak for we would rather die, and nobody bothered translating that part for me. My name's Walt Hutchins. I fix things for a living, which aboard Hollow Reach Station mostly means air conditioners, flickering light panels, and the occasional door that the locals swear is haunted. Sublevel 4 had been sealed since before my contract started, but a clog is a clog, so I grabbed my toolbox, my thermos, and the granola bar I'd been saving all shift, and went looking for the vent. Nobody stopped me at the checkpoint. Nobody was at the checkpoint. I figured budget cuts. Officer Kessadrun almost dropped her tea when the access log lit up. Sublevel 4, entry logged, designation, W. Hutchins, contractor. She read it twice. Sublevel 4 hadn't logged an entry in 11 years. Not since the last containment audit, and audits came with 3 armed escorts, a chaplain, and a signed waiver absolving the Ascendancy of spiritual liability. This log showed one human, alone, carrying, according to the manifest scanner, a hand tool kit and what appeared to be a beverage. She paged security. Nobody answered. She paged again. Where exactly did everyone think Sublevel 4's door had gone, and why had it apparently just opened for a man with a thermos? Security Officer Brawlion arrived at her station within the minute, still buttoning his collar, and made the mistake of asking the obvious question. Should we send someone down after him? Kessa looked at the roster of station personnel who had volunteered for Sublevel 4 duty over the years, and the fact that 4 of the 6 names on it were listed only by service number. Absolutely not, she said. Whoever goes down to retrieve him becomes a second problem. Neither of them said what they were both thinking, which was that there might not be a first problem left to retrieve. Down below, I found the vent right where the schematic said it'd be, half buried under decades of dust, and what looked like old, brittle bone, probably packing foam, the cheap kind that crumbles. The air down here had a smell to it, like a kennel nobody had cleaned out in a while. I figured maybe they used to keep sled dogs down here or something. Company history, probably. Not my department. I popped the vent cover, and that's when something in the dark breathed on my neck. Dr. Orvain Thex had spent 19 years studying the Hollowfang and had never, not once, entered its enclosure without a tranquilizer rig, 2 sets of blast doors, and a written will. So when the internal sensors showed a human standing directly in front of the containment breach, no rig, no doors, no will, he did the only reasonable thing available to him. He screamed, quietly, into his hands. Then he pulled the historical file because someone needed to remind Command what the Hollowfang actually was before they sent anyone else down there to die. The file was thick. It had to be. 3 dynasties had fallen trying to write it. The Ash Veil were gone now, wiped out in the Cold Wars 2 centuries back, all except the one specimen the Ascendancy had captured, sedated, and quietly decided never to speak of again. It stood 4 meters at the shoulder. It had ended a war fleet of 800 vessels in 11 minutes, back when it had been young and merely irritated. It had a name, once in the old tongue, that translated loosely to the debt collector. The file did not explain what it was doing, right now, sniffing a stranger's collar like a compliance officer checking travel documents. The last confirmed contact with the Hollowfang, according to that same file, had been 11 years prior, during the containment audit, 3 armed escorts, a chaplain, and a signed waiver. None of the 3 escorts had filed a follow-up report. The chaplain had resigned that same week and refused, for the rest of his life, to discuss what he had seen down there. Thex had always assumed that meant something had gone horribly wrong. Watching the feed now, he was no longer sure that was true, and he was even less sure which possibility frightened him more. I want to be clear that I did not know any of that. What I knew was that there was a large animal in the vent shaft. It smelled like it hadn't been fed, and it was doing the head tilt thing my neighbor's dog does when he wants a treat and knows better than to ask directly. So I broke off half my granola bar and held it out, the way you would for any big dumb sweetheart of a dog that outweighs your car. It took the granola bar so gently I almost didn't feel it leave my hand. Commander Vesa Ilkarn arrived on the bridge already mid-sentence, demanding to know who authorized a civilian in the vault, and was met with silence because nobody had authorized anything, and the door that was supposed to have 7 redundant locks had apparently been propped open this whole time by somebody's dropped toolbox. "Reseal it," she ordered. "We can't," said the door tech. "The toolbox is metal. It's jamming the mechanism." "Then move the toolbox." "Commander, the toolbox is currently underneath the Hollowfang." Ilkarn looked at the feed. The Hollowfang, the last living nightmare of an entire species, the reason Sublevel 4 existed as a legal fiction rather than a place people visited, was lying on its side. A human was scratching behind what might generously be called its ear. Its tail, a limb capable of shearing through hull plating, was thumping softly against the floor. Nobody on that bridge could explain what they were looking at. "Somebody, please, explain what they were looking at." "Do we send a retrieval team?" asked the door tech, already regretting it. Ilkarn didn't answer right away because the honest answer was that the Ascendancy's last retrieval team, dispatched during the audit 11 years back, had a service file that simply stopped mid-sentence, with no closing report. "We wait," she said instead. Nobody on that bridge felt particularly good about waiting, but nobody had a better idea, and the Hollowfang did not, at that moment, look like it was in any hurry to be rescued from anything. I'll admit I got a little worried when it rolled over because that's a lot of dog to have rolling around in a tight service corridor, and I did not want to explain a dented vent panel to facilities. But it settled down eventually, head on its paws, watching me work with the vent like it had never seen anyone use a socket wrench before. Maybe it hadn't. Company probably didn't let just anyone down here. I got the vent unclogged in about 20 minutes. Mostly old foam packing like I figured, and when I stood up to leave, it followed me. Not aggressive or anything. Just walking a half step behind, the way a dog does when it's decided you're its person now and hasn't told you yet. Dr. Thex watched the readout with the specific horror of a man watching every peer-reviewed paper he'd ever written quietly disprove itself. 19 years of behavioral logs described the Hollowfang as unbondable, traumatized beyond therapeutic reach, and, in one particularly grim footnote, incapable of trust as a biological category. He had built his entire career on the theory that the Ash Vale were simply too far gone, too broken by whatever the Cold Wars had done to them, to ever again recognize kindness as anything but a prelude to violence. The footage showed it leaning its entire head into a stranger's hand. He thought, distantly, that maybe the problem had never been the Hollowfang. Maybe every Velmiri who'd ever entered that vault had done so armed, frightened, and already certain of what they'd find, and the Hollowfang, whatever else it was, had never once met someone who wasn't afraid of it. It had waited 2 centuries for someone to just not scream. And the first one to manage it had done so while holding a thermos. Word got to me later, through the site foreman who looked like he hadn't slept, that Sublevel 4 was some kind of restricted historical zone, and that I probably shouldn't have gone down there without a permit. Fair enough. I filled out the incident form. Under description of hazard encountered, I wrote large dog, possibly a guard breed, seemed friendly. Fix the vent anyway. They didn't correct that description for 3 days. I think everyone upstairs was still arguing about how. My buddy Deshawn, who runs cargo intake 2 decks up, mentioned that the Velmiri crew on his shift had quietly started referring to Sublevel 4 in the past tense, the way you talk about a relative who'd passed. He also said nobody would explain why, which tracked because nobody would explain it to me either, and at some point you stop asking questions about a job that pays on time and has decent vending machines. Ilkarn eventually gave the order nobody wanted to give, which was to let the human back in, with an observation escort, which in practice meant 6 Velmiri officers standing as far from the vault door as the corridor allowed while Walt Hutchins strolled and whistling. The Hollowfang met him at the threshold like it had been waiting since he left, which, according to the internal logs, it had, motionless, facing the door, for 6 straight hours. Thex, watching from a safe distance with a data slate and what remained of his professional dignity, finally said the thing everyone on that bridge had been too afraid to say out loud, that the single greatest weapon their species had ever contained, feared for 200 years, credited with the fall of 3 royal houses, had just been out-negotiated by a granola bar. Nobody argued with him. Nobody could. They offered me hazard pay, which I turned down because scratching a dog's ears isn't exactly hazardous duty in my book, and I said as much. They also asked, very formally, whether I'd be willing to return for continued behavioral engagement, which is a fancy way of saying the big guy wouldn't eat unless I was in the room. I said sure. Beats fixing light panels. Nobody's told me yet what the Hollowfang actually is, and at this point I've stopped asking because every time I bring it up somebody in a uniform gets a look on their face like I've asked about a family member nobody talks about. Whatever it is, it's gentle, it's food-motivated, and it hates the vacuum cleaner, same as every dog I've ever met. Apparently, there's a folder on it marked with the Ascendancy's highest classification level. I haven't read it. I did, however, get it a squeaky toy shaped like a shuttle, and I'm told that's now also classified.